You know what I think would be an interesting exercise is if you could keep track for a week of how many advertisements you see for borrowing. Last week, I went and checked my mail, and I had 8 pieces of mail. 7 of them were for borrowing, like either a credit card application, or refinance my loan, or get a personal loan, and then the 8th one was an advertisement for something else. Like between your email and your phone and computer and TV and your mailbox, like we are just constantly bombarded with offers to take on more debt, to borrow more and more. And we live in a society that's just really dominated by debt. Right now we're approaching $15 trillion in consumer debt in the United States of America. Now most of that is in mortgage lending, but also included that in that figure is student loans, car loans, credit cards, really everything that fits under the umbrella of consumer loans. Add that all up, that's a huge pile, $15 trillion worth of debt. It's just an insane number. You really even can't wrap your mind around a figure that large. And so as Christians living in this very prosperous country where we're constantly bombarded with messages of consumerism and materialism, and you need better and you deserve better, how do we navigate this? Because I think we understand intuitively it's not wrong to enjoy good food or to enjoy fun or to travel or to have a car, to have a house, or to have furniture or a TV or any of these things. However, as a Christian, we do understand that life's not about money. We understand that the love of money is the root of all evil, and so we want to be careful about having our hearts filled with materialism and being led astray by that. But at the same time, we understand it's not necessarily wrong to spend money on things that we enjoy. And that leads us to this question of debt. Is it wrong to go into debt? Should Christians even have debt in the first place? So I want to tackle that in this episode. Let's talk about what the Bible has to say on this very important topic and make sure that as we make these decisions in our personal finances, we're allowing the Bible to speak first as opposed to just our culture and our society and advertising and messaging that we're seeing all the time. So as far as this question of does the Bible prohibit going into debt? Well, I think probably the best example or the best argument to be made that no, it's not wrong is you go back to the Old Testament, you look at the Mosaic Law, and God gave some ceremonial laws, some religious laws, but he also gave laws for how the society was to function, so governmental laws. And some of those had to do with borrowing, with about borrowing, lending, charging interest, who could not be charged interest, when debts were to be forgiven. And so obviously this was something that was intended to be part of the culture and the society that the Israelites were going to live in. And so if it was something that was wrong, God wouldn't have been giving them rules about how to do it correctly. So nowhere in the Bible are we going to find a strict prohibition against borrowing. However, we are going to find several warnings about the potential pitfalls of going into debt. And so that's where we want to spend our time on here. I would say that it's not wrong to go into debt. However, it is not a decision to be taken lightly. We've got to understand that there are a lot of warnings about the potential pitfalls of going into debt. So let's look at a few passages in the Bible that speak to debt and the pros and the cons. First passage I think that's good to consider is Proverbs 22, verses 26 and 27. It says, "Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, one of those who is surety for debts." What this is referring to is somebody who would make a handshake agreement, who would guarantee another person's loan. And we see this in our society today. We often call it co-signing, where somebody wants to apply for a loan, but either they don't have the collateral, they don't have the credit history, or they have bad credit history. And so the lender is going to say, no, I need somebody else to step in and promise that they're going to pay your loan if you don't pay it back. And what Proverbs is saying is, don't be that person. Don't be the person who guarantees the loan, because verse 27 gives us the reason. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you? In other words, if you don't have the money to pay back, then why would you want to put yourself in a position where you have to suffer the consequences of somebody else's bad behavior or misfortune? If they don't pay back their loan for whatever reason, they're going to come after you next, and you may have to be in a position where you're selling your literally your bed in order to pay back this loan that wasn't even yours in the first place. That's not wise. Don't put yourself in that position. By the way, Proverbs is chock full of great financial advice, great financial principles. Proverbs is a book of principles and not promises. Sometimes we can go astray reading the Proverbs because we think it's a formulaic in its advice. In other words, do X and Y will always be the result. But rather, Proverbs is a book of principles. In other words, these behaviors and these characteristics often lead to this result. Not always, but this is the tendency. And so there's a warning about co-signing and guaranteeing somebody else's loan. Don't do that. Don't put yourself in that position. If you look back just a few verses previously to verse 7 of chapter 22, it says, "The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender." Sometimes people want to point to this verse as a reason for not going into debt and say, see, the Bible says don't go into debt because the borrower is servant to the lender. But that's not a prohibition against going into debt. It's a warning about what debt is. Debt is a borrower or is a servant-master relationship. The rich rules over the poor. So when you borrow money, you become the servant and you are obligated. It limits your freedom. And if you've ever paid off a debt before, if you paid off your mortgage or credit cards or a student loan, you kind of know what I'm talking about here because it's not a physical burden that comes off your shoulders, but it almost feels like it. It allows you to breathe a big sigh of relief. See, you're free to make decisions about lots of things you spend your money on, but not your debt payments. Like if I want to stop paying for Disney Plus, I can do that. That's fine, and I just won't get Disney Plus. But I can't do that with my mortgage. I can't tell my mortgage company, I'm going to take a month off. I'm taking a 6-month break. There will be consequences. Unless I am prepared to pay that loan off in full, I don't have that flexibility and that freedom. And that's what Proverbs 22:7 is speaking to. Entering into debt means you're entering into a servant-master relationship, and that will be the case until the debt is paid off. Psalm 37, verse 21 says, "The wicked borrows and does not repay, but the righteous shows mercy and gives." This speaks to the importance. This speaks to almost a sacred nature of entering into a debt arrangement, because the Bible says that somebody who takes out a loan but then is not going to repay that loan, that's something that a wicked person would do. The wicked person has no reservations about not paying back their loan. They're okay with taking out money, using somebody else's money, and then not paying it back to them. So the Bible says that that's wicked. If you're going to borrow, then you should take that responsibility to repay your loan seriously. It would be incredibly unwise and it would be dishonest to borrow money that you didn't reasonably believe you would be able to pay back. And I know that there are always exceptions and examples of where something unexpected happened, something that couldn't have been foreseen. I'm not saying that, if life threw you one huge curveball and you found yourself having to declare bankruptcy or to default on a loan, that you're a wicked person. But it's the wicked person who decides to take out a loan that they don't honestly or reasonably believe that they're going to be able to repay back in the first place. So be very careful about that. That's why Solomon in Ecclesiastes 5:5 says, better is it that thou shouldest not vow than that thou shouldest vow and not pay. In other words, it would just be better to not even borrow in the first place than to borrow and not be able to pay back. Taking on debt is not a decision to be taken lightly. It needs to be made with caution, with consideration, even I would say with prayer and seeking advice, especially if it's a very large loan. And really, here's a great question that's a filter for your borrowing decisions. Is borrowing this money consistent with being a good steward? We understand that we're called to be a good steward of the money that God's entrusted us with, just like our time, just like our talents, just like our opportunities. We want to make the most of it. And so if we can, with all honesty and good conscience, say, God, I believe taking out this loan is actually a good use of the money that you've entrusted me with, then that probably means it's okay to take on that debt. And that may mean, again, taking out a mortgage. It's very difficult to save up enough money to pay for a home in cash. But also we have to understand that homes generally appreciate in value. So taking out a loan to buy a home is buying something that more than likely is not going to go down in value. It's probably only going to increase in value. And so that can be a wise financial decision. Taking out a loan perhaps for schooling, for education, for a degree, something that is going to allow you to get into a field where you'll be able to make more money because of your education, and therefore that extra money that you will earn will far outweigh the cost of that loan. Maybe a business loan, something where there's costs, there's things that need to be done initially, but over time the investment will eclipse the cost of the loan. Yes, there's plenty of examples we can give of where taking out debt is actually good stewardship, but there's a lot of examples we can also point to where taking on debt is not a good use. It's not good stewardship. And so that's a good filter to use. Is this good stewardship? There's a big reason why 8 out of 10 people who give to their church regularly have no credit card debt. It's because they're not their personal finances, their monthly budget is not constricted by debt. When you have credit cards and student loans and car loans and mortgage, you'll be amazed at how much of your monthly expenditures that eats up and takes away your margin. There's a lot of really well-meaning people who want to be generous, people who want to do more and give more, but they just can't. They're just not in a position to be able to because they've allowed their spending and their debt to get out of control and to expand to the point to where they're just trying to play catch up. And that's not where we want to be. And so if that's where you find yourself, if you find yourself in a position where debt has taken on too much of your monthly expenses, it's starting to balloon to a place where it's becoming unmanageable, then you need to have a plan to pay it off. Look back just a couple episodes before, I believe it's episode 43, we talked about the debt avalanche. Start with your highest interest debt and then work down from there. We go into detail. That's a great place to start to help you to begin paying off debt. Make sure that you pay your credit card off each month. If you have a credit card like I do, it can be a great tool if you use it well, but don't carry a balance on it. All right, pay that off at the end of each month instead of paying interest unnecessarily. Don't co-sign. I would really give a huge warning about co-signing in almost every single circumstance. It's very hard to think of a situation where that would actually be a good idea to co-sign for a loan. And then make sure that you have an emergency fund in place. You got to have a cash buffer for the times when something unexpected is going to happen. Because it's not an if, it's a when. If you're riding along the edge financially and you don't have a guardrail in place, all it takes is one slip up. All it takes is one distracted moment and boom, you're over the side of that cliff and you're now plunging back into debt and you're having to put things on the credit card and you're starting to have to call up friends and family, and that's just not where you want to be. Make sure that you have some money set aside for those emergencies to make sure that you're not going to have to take on debt when you're in your most vulnerable financial state. So I hope this episode's been helpful to you. Make sure that you approach debt from a biblical worldview. Is it wrong? No, I would say it's not wrong to take on debt. However, you need to know the warnings. You need to know the dangers. And it would be better to just not go into debt than to put yourself in a position where you can't pay back your loan. So anytime you're going to take on debt, make sure you ask yourself the question, is this good stewardship? Am I being a good steward of the money that God's entrusted me with? And you'll be much better for it. As always, if you have questions and ever want to talk to me about anything, you can reach out to me at info@nateskelly.com, or you can visit my website, schedule a call with me there. There's a tab there, schedule a call, and you can pick a time that works for you. Thanks again for listening to this episode, and look forward to seeing you on the next one.